All right. So, again, we're here on the Sermon on the Mount, and just following up with what Ryan has taught on last Sunday and last Wednesday. We're kind of following this theme. But what I'll say is, which is interesting, I was talking to a few folks about this. We have the Huts here, and we've had some great conversations on marriage. And it's been very rewarding, fulfilling, and just helping us spiritually. But as Ryan and I were putting this lesson together for Sermon on the Mount, it just so happened that today one of the topics that we're talking about is divorce. It's one of the lessons that Jesus brought forth. This was not planned in any way. It just happened to fall that way. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. But I think it goes along with the theme that we're doing this week and this weekend. And so Jesus definitely has his opinions on what he thinks Torah is saying. And then you're going to see the difficulties later in Matthew of how the Pharisees kind of challenged that. All right. And so just as a reminder, where we're at. We talked about this kingdom identity, and we went through the Beatitudes, famously known as the Beatitudes. How blessed or how fortunate are those who mourn, are those who are poor in spirit, are those who are peacemakers, are those who are reviled, all for God, right, and for his sake. All right, and you kind of get this picture of this identity of these folks who are going to be citizens of this new kingdom that Jesus is talking about. All right, that they're going to be somehow, they're going to preserve this covenant, this new covenant that was spoken about through Isaiah in Isaiah 49 and Isaiah 60. We talked about this new covenant, and they're going to be the salt. They're going to preserve this new covenant, and they're going to this new covenant. They're going to shine forth. They're going to let their light shine, and then as this light shines, all the nations are going to see them, and they're going to river up to them. Remember that? They're going to river up to them, and then they're going to teach them Torah, or the instruction of God. All right, and so and then how's that going to happen? And here Jesus goes into his 6 case studies on what that actually looks like. These new folks with this kingdom identity, as they go forth, how are they going to operate into the world? All right, that's where we're at. And Jesus starts off with, "Hey, I did not come here to abolish the law." All right, there's accusations out there from Pharisees and scribes who think I'm here to abolish the law or teach something different. And he says, no, I'm not doing that. All right, I'm here to actually fulfill it. All right, and matter of fact, I'm going to fulfill it so good that these folks who have this new kingdom identity, they're going to have greater righteousness than even those of the Pharisees, even those of those spiritual leaders that you have today. Okay, and so and then he goes into his case studies. His 6 case studies here, and so that's where, if we've been following along in these 6 case studies, he quotes from Torah. You have heard it said, thou shalt not murder, right? And then, but what does he say after that? Who remembers what Ryan taught there? You shouldn't murder, but what's the real lesson there? What's the wisdom underneath that? Right. Anyone who's even angry with his brother. That animosity there. And so, what Ryan taught was, all right, you wake up in the morning, and generally, most people don't wake up and automatically just want to murder somebody, right? They just don't wake up like, I'm ready to murder, right? There's something that has built up there over time, and this animosity against a person for whatever reason, and it just festers, and then finally, someone takes an action against that, right? And that's the heart that Jesus is trying to get at. Even in your anger, that little idea in your head that you don't tell anyone else, only you know about, and God. That right there is what he's trying to get after. And then he talks about, thou shalt not commit adultery. And it's, he says again, no one really wakes up one day and says, I'm going to commit adultery. No, there's just that thought in the head, the snowball effect of what you use for your eyes. And Ryan talked about, the looking, right? And Ryan, I forget the word for look, right? But the Hebrew word that he brought up there, but it's the staring, right? And you start creating this mental picture in your head, and it starts building from there. Okay. All right. And so as we learned, as we learned through this, we're in our first 3 case studies, and Matthew, the writer of Matthew, he likes to talk in threes, right? We had the 3 sets of the Beatitudes. There were 3 sets of 3, right? We had the salt, the light, and the city on the hill, the sets of 3 there. And now we have our 6 case studies that we say, hey, they're all sets of 3 as well, all right? And they have their themes, all right? And so on our first 3, right, we talk about murder, we talk about adultery, and we talk about, what we're going to talk about today is divorce. And we say that there's a theme here. And this theme is that through God's wisdom, he demands that we treat everyone with dignity and with value. Okay, with dignity and value. And so just remember who Jesus is talking to here. He's saying that, hey, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, right? These are the folks who are impoverished. These are the folks that don't have a high social status or no influence, right? And so they get it. Here are folks that don't have a lot and have probably been treated badly, right? But what we have here is murder, adultery, and divorce. And at the heart of all that is, how am I and how are you going to treat people in this world? And Jesus is getting through that here. And so today we're going to talk divorce, all right? And so let me ask that real quick. Why is that important to Jesus? This thought that we have to treat everyone with dignity and value.
There were laws about how to treat the widow, the sojourner, the traveler, that were very legalistic, but at the same time, they weren't really showing love for those people. I'm going to do this to obey the law. I'm not going to go any further.
Absolutely. So the comment there, if you didn't hear it, is that it wasn't necessarily a focus, right? That it was folks who were acting legalistically. They were following the law. But that heart wasn't there, and so, it just wasn't prevalent there in that time. Yes?
I think one thing, too, if you're looking long-term at what Jesus knows will become the kingdom, at some point the kingdom won't just be for Jewish people. And so if you can't get to a point where you see other Jews as created in the image of God, how will you ever get to a point where you'll see the Gentile in that way?
Yeah.
And so Jesus, I think, is really tackling this idea of seeing each other as image bearers in that way.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of latch on to what Ryan said there, right? And so the comment was, Jesus kind of looking forward here and looking beyond just Jews being the chosen people. We know, as we continue on to Scripture, that Gentiles, all nations, are part of this future covenant, right? And the comment there was, hey, all of us, we image God. We were made in the image of God. And I think that's so important, and Jesus sees that. And so that is why everyone must be treated, he demands it, with dignity, respect, and value. Everyone has value. But man, people, we just seem to put people on pedestals, and we get arrogant and we put people down, and even in our anger, right? And it's going back to the murder one, right? Somehow we can show anger to somebody, and in that type of way, we kind of devalue them, that other person. In adultery, we devalue that other person based on our actions and thoughts. And he's trying to get to the heart of that, okay? And so what's interesting here is that, when we go through divorce, and as Ryan taught for the murder lesson and adultery lesson, those came out of the commandments that we know, the famous 10 Commandments, right? But as we get into divorce, it doesn't. He kind of switches it here. All right, and where it comes from is this, I won't say obscure law, but this law in Deuteronomy 24 and verse 1, and we're going to go there here in a little bit, but this law that's kind of confusing people during this time. And he's going to address this law and kind of step into this first century debate that's going on. Okay, and then what I'll say right here is that when Jesus teaches in Matthew 5 about divorce, I will just say this, that he is not teaching a complete lesson about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. All right, he is stepping into a debate that's going on during that time. We're going to see that here in a minute. So let's go ahead and read this. Oh, I had something fancy going. All right, let's go ahead and read this. All right, it says from Jesus, Matthew 5 and verse 31. It was said, "Whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for the reason of unchastity, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." All right, so these words here about marriage, divorce, remarriage, they have, and we all understand this, they have a huge influence over the past 2,000 years. There are many books, there are many commentaries about this particular lesson right here. All right, and there's a diversity of views, of the implications that's involved with that, and what it actually means here. All right, and so we're going to kind of dig into that here, but I just want you to remember that previous to this teaching, right? Jesus, previous to teaching, was about adultery, right? And who was Jesus specifically talking to? Who remembers? Any takers? Who was he talking to? What gender, I guess I'll say. Make it easy. Men. Okay? It's in there, right? If you go to the previous lesson about adultery in the previous verses there, it talks about him against her, right? We're going to get into the same theme here. All right? It's going to talk about his wife and lets her go and gives her a certificate of divorce. Jesus is talking about something that's a problem. All right? And we're going to hit this here in a minute, but I just want to make that clear that this is Jesus. He's still talking to men because he sees a problem. All right? And so because that he's not to say that women can't lust, right? We know that's not true. We know women can lust. Women can do bad things as well. But I just want you to remember, first century Israel, first century Middle East, and you think about the power that men have and the power that women have in that context. Okay? And our overarching theme is, how can we value other people who are weaker than us in some way? And this is what Jesus is getting after. Okay? And so, Jesus is still talking about men, describing this greater, higher calling of doing right by other people. And somehow underneath all of this, Jesus is putting his finger on something that somebody's not doing right against someone else. And so we're going to see God's wisdom here. All right. And so Jesus here, he's talking to his followers, and he's saying, "You have heard that it was said," and then he's quoting from Torah, and then he says, "Whoever sends his wife away, he must give her a certificate of divorce." All right, so what's he quoting from here? What's he referencing here? Well, like I already said, it's Deuteronomy 24 and verse 1. And we're going to see that here in a minute. But I want to first go to an interaction that we're going to see later on in Matthew. And the same conversation is going to happen. In Matthew 19, we're going to hit that here next, but Matthew's going to hit this lesson about divorce, and he's stepping into this debate, and he is going to expound on what he's actually teaching here in Matthew 5. So let's just look at that really quick. Matthew 19 and verse 3. Matthew 19 and verse 3, and it's up on the screen. It says, "Some Pharisees came to Jesus testing him and asking, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? All right, so this is a test. Obviously, we know this now. Here are the Pharisees and the scribes, but the Pharisees come to Jesus, and there is no genuineness in this question. They're not saying, hey, teacher, what is your stance on divorce? Help us understand. Right? They're not doing that, right? What we know is that it's a trap. It's a trap. Why is it a trap? Why would this be a trap during this time? How is using this scripture? Because they're going back to something that's being taught here. Why would this be a trap?
Deuteronomy 24 says there is a reason.
Okay.
And the way that Jesus is probably assuming some of these have heard him on the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
With his corrections.
Yeah.
Or refining of that text, that they saw a dissonance between those two things.
Yeah.
So they're trying to say, hey, there was a reason. You can get if you're unpleased with her in Deuteronomy 24, you can actually divorce her. So, hey, what do you say, Jesus?
Right.
And trying to catch him so that he'll say something that contradicts what they view in Deuteronomy 24.
Yeah, it's a loaded question, right? It's a loaded question. They did not ask him, what are your views on divorce? Specifically, they asked him, what's your view about any reason divorce? And that's interesting to me because that just seems like a very specific question. Why are you asking that question? Well, like I said, there's a live debate that's going on during this time. All right, and during this time, you have all these rabbis that are developing these commentaries, and they're debating on this topic right here. And this is 1,000 years later. 1,000 years later from Deuteronomy 24 that we're going to read here in a minute. But Deuteronomy 24, 1,000 years later, all these folks and these rabbis, they're confused, and they're trying to put their teaching on it. And what came out of it? Hey, is it lawful to divorce for any reason? Well, that means something's happening. People are divorcing for any reason, right? And so they're bringing this up to trap Jesus because as he's gaining these followers, right? He's gaining these followers, and if he says, hey, I side with this one, well, then maybe he'll divide his followers by saying that, right? And then somehow weaken his position. I see it's a trap. All right, so let's look at this, Deuteronomy 24. All right, it says, when a man, all right, we're talking about men again, all right, and this is going to be something that continues on in Matthew 5 here. But when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency. I'm not sure. I'm going to ask what other translations say there, but has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out from his house. Anyone else have something other than some indecency? Uncleanness? Anything else? Uncleanness? Okay. All right. Uncleanness. Good. All right. So why I have that highlighted there, all right, well, and we're going to talk about this phrase here. This is the phrase that all the rabbis are divided about. Over 1,000 years, commentaries have been written about this phrase. And it's actually erva deber. I don't know if that's how you say it, but that's how I say it. Erva deber, okay? And what it translates to, right, is nakedness of a matter. All right? Because he has found some nakedness of a matter in her. All right? And all these rabbis are just confused on what this means. All right? So what does that mean? Well, I think luckily for us, what we normally do with all these different types of words, we go into Scripture. How is it used somewhere else? How is it used so we can help define what erva deber means? But the problem is it only shows up here. That's it. And in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1, erva deber only shows up here. Nakedness of a matter. Okay? And so in this dense, ambiguous little phrase, it's been interpreted many different ways over thousands of years or 1,000 years. And Jesus is now drawn into this first century debate that's going on. And you know, how we know this is because we have what's called, I messed that up. We have what's called the Talmud, which exists today. And this is this sacred Jewish book that's out there. It's a collection of writings. It's like a collection of commentaries by these rabbis over the many, many years since Torah has been produced. You have these rabbis who say, hey, this is what the law says. This is what it means. And then you have these rabbis who debate each other in this Talmud. And it just so happens that they have these first century texts that describe this particular debate, this nakedness of a matter. And they're going back and forth. All right, and so we're just kind of focus on that. There's three big ones. We'll focus on two. All right, and the first one is this house of Shammai. This house of Shammai comes along, and this is first century teaching. House of Shammai comes on. That just means Rabbi Shammai. He says a man should divorce his wife only because he has found grounds for it in chastity, since it has said, because he has found in her indecency of a thing, or nakedness of a matter. He quotes Deuteronomy 24:1. All right, that's his stance. All right, that's his teaching. And then you have the house of Hillel, who says even if she spoiled his dish, she's a bad cook, right? Because he has found in her indecency of a thing. Right? So he's in the camp of divorce for any reason. Right? Even if the food is bad. Right? These are things that are being brought up. I brought the other one there. Rabbi Akiba says, even if he found someone else prettier than she, since it says, and it shall be if she finds no favor in his eyes. So this is an actual debate that's happening during first century. Okay? And so now you see, here are these Pharisees, they're coming to Jesus, and they say, hey, what do you think about any reason divorce? Right? And you have this society that is led by men who feel I should be able to divorce for any reason. Okay? And that's something that he is now stepping into. Okay? And so, nakedness of a matter. What does that mean? It leaves a lot to figure out. You have 1,000 years that have gone by since it's been said. You have all these rabbis who are respected, who are supposed to be religious teachers, and they're educated, and they should be the ones that you go to for this advice, and they can't even agree what's to be said here. All right, so what do you do here? And so, again, the Pharisees are asking Jesus. They're not saying, what are the legitimate grounds for divorce. They're not asking that. Right? They're asking to give his view on Deuteronomy 24 because it is a controversial matter. All right? And so to me, I'll say the huge implication here is this, that whatever Jesus responds with here, it's going to put him in a certain camp. All right? That's the goal. It's going to put him in a certain camp. But I will say again, Jesus is not and was not asked and is not giving his complete teaching on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Okay? He is answering a question because of the debate that's going on. All right? And I think that's important to understand here in this context as we bring this forward. So, here you have a bunch of men who are having a conversation about divorce and what they're allowed to do. All right, and it's in the Middle East. There's a bunch of context there. And so if you think about a woman and what legal recourse they have during this time, it's not much. It's not much. And we see this today. Okay, those who have served the military and have gone over to the Middle East and have seen how that society operates, right? The women, they're dictating what they can wear, when they can eat, who they can go outside with, right? You see what happens in this type of society against women, all right? And this is what Jesus is trying to address here. So let me just back up. As a reminder, as we started off in the first 3 case studies, right? And we talked about living with a greater righteousness, greater than the Pharisees, right? And this righteousness Well, let me ask, what does righteousness mean? We talked about it this weekend too, but what does righteousness mean? What's that? Being right with God? Absolutely. Absolutely. And then Jesus also talks about how being right with God, as right standing is what Jeremy DeHutt said this weekend, but also righteousness with each other. It's all about relationships with each other. How does this new kingdom identity, these folks, these new citizens in this kingdom operate in this world, right? And so we, again, have to look at everyone with dignity and care. And he's bringing up these men who are treating women as sexual objects, right? When he talked about that lesson about adultery. And now he's talking about these men who are just casting women off because they're not pretty anymore, because they don't know how to cook, right? Because for any reason that they find. It's a real problem. And Jesus is coming along and saying, hey, you need to protect those who are weaker. Yes.
And even in our society, here after 2,000 years or more, we find that people use all kind of weak justifications for divorce. It still goes on, and it's all unjustified. A lot of it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the comment was, even in today's society, there's still this any reason divorce thing that's happening, and people are finding any type of reason to divorce. Yes, sir.
Yes, we see it in the Holy Writ that Jesus said that man is never satisfied, you know, and but God wants us basically to go with what He has put in His Word, you know, usher forth what as a commandment, saying statement in the scriptural guideposts as far as divorce, but man generally is never satisfied, but His Word will keep us in our community.
Absolutely. So comment there was, in Scripture, man is never satisfied. But, sticking with God, we can find our satisfaction there. So, okay. Good. All right. And so, I'll tell you what. As I was going through this, thinking about this concept here of how Jesus is coming forward and he's seeing a problem, how men are taking advantage of women, okay? And he's kind of seeing this, and he sees that, hey, women don't have any decision-making power. They put it all in the hands of a husband who can say whatever he wants to say, right? And if he doesn't like it, he'll throw him out, right? And the real tragedy here for me is, as I was studying this lesson, I thought about the woman at the well. You guys remember that story? When Jesus goes to the well and he meets the Samaritan woman, right? And then what does he highlight about this woman? Anyone can highlight that for me? I hear whispering. I have bad hearing. She's married a bunch of times, right? So I remember reading through that even very recently. I remember reading through that, and my man brain went to, wow, she must be very promiscuous. She went from husband to husband to husband. What's wrong with this lady? But when you think about first century Israel, Middle East, women don't have power, and especially if you're poor, you don't have power. What do you think is actually happening to this woman? She kept getting put away. Right? She kept getting thrown away. And that's what's happening. I don't know. It doesn't say that in Scripture, but I mean, if the context is there, it just kind of makes sense for me. And I think that's a real tragedy there. And if you remember that narrative, right? It's just kind of sad there. So the context here is men can divorce so easily for any reason, right? But you can see how things can go wrong in that type of society. We see it today. There's examples of that today. All right, and how a society led by men who think they can have all the control and women are second class, what happens? Everything in their life is controlled. Okay, and we see that today. So blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, and it all kind of circles back there. And so I think that helps us gain a perspective on what Jesus is going to say next here in Matthew 19. And Jesus turns his attention, instead of the divorce law in Deuteronomy 24, he doesn't go there. Okay, he doesn't try to teach what that really means, right? He doesn't go there. He redirects the entire focus of the conversation to the first 2 pages of Genesis, right? And he said, and he answered, and he said to them, this is Matthew 19, 4-6. He said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What, therefore, God has joined together, let no man separate. And so the image of God is being described on the first 2 pages of Genesis. First 2 pages of the Bible there, right? And that first story, it makes it very clear that, of course, there is man and woman, male and female, and together they represent an image God. And then he quotes from the Garden of the Eden story in chapter 2 about how the one human became 2 and how these 2 humans became one again through marriage. Very, very powerful. Okay? Matter of fact, I don't have it on the screen. I'm going to go to it real quick. If Genesis chapter 1 real quick, and I got to put my code in. Genesis chapter 1 in verse 28. 1 verse 28. I got it here. I said, God blessed them, and this is God after he created man and woman. Right? He says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule together. Like that is the initial creation of God for man and woman, to rule together. And I think, and Jesus takes them back to that whole thought there. All right. And then we have this famous line here, is what God has joined together, let no human separate or man separate. And so for Jesus, marriage is one way, a very powerful way that man can image God, right? And for Jesus, that's clearly the foundation point for him here, right? Foundation point of any thinking about ending the oneness or separating those two. He goes back to that. And so what's fascinating here is that Jesus, he's appealing to one part of Torah in Genesis. He's going back to Genesis here as a kind of leverage over an abusive interpretation of Deuteronomy 24, which is also a part of Torah. He's using Genesis chapters 1 and 2 to explain Deuteronomy 24. All right? And so when the Pharisees try to trap Jesus and in their ongoing debates about, legal divorce, Jesus says, hey, you're missing the point. You're missing the whole point. Men are looking for godly reasons to put away their wives. They're asking, where's the legal line? What am I allowed to do to divorce my wife? And Jesus knows that divorce is painful. It can be harmful. And he wants to teach the underlying wisdom here. Rather than just, this is what you guys got to do legalistically. Right. And so going back to Matthew here. Let me just push it forward here. 7 through 9. In Matthew 19, 7 through 9. It says, they said to him, and this is the Pharisees, they said to Jesus, why then did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce and send her away? Look how they worded that, command. Okay? And he answers, he said to them, because of your hardness of heart. Your hardness of heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it has not been this way. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. Okay? And so what does he mean? What does he mean by this hardness of heart? Let me ask you that. He says, because of your hardness of heart, Moses permitted.
Because they were trying to use the law to justify what they wanted.
Absolutely. They're trying to use the law to justify what they wanted to do. Okay? Can you explain that? So why their hardness of heart, they're using the law, and that's why Moses gave in? If God did not want us to separate or divorce our wives, why did he permit it? I guess that's the question. Why would he permit it? Yes, ma'am.
Well, when I think about this, I always think about back when it talks about with God and Moses. It says, God commanded Moses or God told Moses to say this. This does not say that God commanded Moses to allow them to get a certificate. This says Moses allowed them.
Okay. All right. I like that. Moses, it didn't come from God, it came from Moses, right? Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. Yes.
I feel like it's just the hardness of heart that they had anyway. I mean, they worshiped idols, and God allowed that to go on.
Yeah.
So it's just they have this hardness of heart against God's laws, actually.
Absolutely. Hardness of heart against God's law. Yes, sir.
A couple of things. One, it's fascinating that they're focused on the command. And Jesus correctly reworded it to the word permitted.
Absolutely.
In this particular case, not that he wanted it, but Jesus goes back to the rule. What is the rule? And the debate that they've been having has been all around the exceptions.
Right.
And Jesus has been trying to, I think the hardness of the heart piece is that you guys are so focused on the wrong things, the exception, the exception, the exception. You guys are trying to worm your way out of this in so
Right.
many ways. You guys have missed the whole point of marriage and what God was establishing in the beginning, the love and the image of what God is, that Jesus is the church. We learn about it in Ephesians later.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys have missed it. You guys are focused so much on the argument. And there's something here that's beautiful that your hardness of your heart can't see.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting here, right? That's a great comment. Your hardness of heart is blocking them on what is truly at the heart of what marriage is, right? I'm going to give you a really bad analogy, right? But I'm going to try. All right. When my oldest son was younger, and we had this rule that he goes to bed at 10 o'clock. Go to bed at 10 o'clock, get your homework done and shower and do all the things you got to do before 10 o'clock. Because 10 o'clock, lights are out. I don't care if you stare in the darkness, lights are out. Okay? And then, we follow that rule 80% of the time. And what would happen, though? We found out, as he was going through his teen years, that he did not like to do homework. Okay? And we would find out that he has a bad grade. And we talk to his teacher, and we're like, hey, what can he do? And his teacher gives a bunch of work that he has to do by the next day or by that Friday. And he has to stay up late, right, to get it all done. And so I have this rule that says you go to bed by 10. But now, because of his decisions and the condition that he is now in, right, I now am permitting him to stay up late so he can get all this work done to get his life right again, right, to get in good standing by me, right? And so I would permit that. Bad analogy. But what I'll say is this. The people of Israel, as they were working through their life and God was trying to chug them along here and pull them along, and we saw this in Aaron and John's class during Joshua, Judges, and Ruth, right? And how the people of Israel are they're just not getting it. And their condition in life is getting worse and worse and worse. And they go back to God, and God has to permit things to happen, right? This is kind of highlighting that. Because of your hardness of heart of not following Torah, of not following my commands, you are now in these conditions. Moses permitted it. And it wasn't a command from God, it was being allowed or permitted. Yes.
A lot of what you're saying too, it all comes from impurity, right? So in the beginning, it was made with Adam and Eve, and moving past that hardness of heart, sin, however it's said, I really look at like Jeremiah 2, where it goes on God having an unfaithful wife of Israel,
Yes.
and repetitively taking Israel back over and over and over. So even by God's design, in that instance, He's continuing to take the unfaithful wife of Israel back.
Yep.
Every single time. So even by design, in that case, it wasn't designed.
Yes. So, Jesus' words are highly controversial here, all right, because there are men out here, during this first century who are listening to this, and they can't believe what he's saying, all right? They can't believe what he's saying here. And so, and again, what's happening? Women, and during this time, where do they find their safety and security? How do they find that during this time? Through a man. That's just how that society was set up. Generally. Not to say it was 100% like that all the time, but generally, that's how it was. Okay? And you can kind of see what happens here. Men are throwing these wives away for any reason, divorce, and these women have to figure out a way to live and survive. Okay? All right. And so, and I think that's what's happening here. And so let me go back to Matthew here. I'm going to read this last part quickly here. It says, "But I say to you," this is back to Sermon on the Mount, "that everyone who divorces his wife except for the reason of unchastity or porneia," we've heard that term before, "makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." Let me ask this. How in this context, do you make her commit adultery? How does that happen? Yes.
He divorces her and someone else marries her?
And someone else marries her. He divorces her and someone else marries her. Right? Again, going back to the teaching that Jesus is talking about here, he's saying, hey, except for unchastity or sexual immorality or adultery, whatever that porneia, it means sexual immorality. It's kind of a broad term for many things, right? Except for those things, right? You can't divorce your wife. And these men were doing that. And these women who are trying to find their security with other men, because that's how they remain safe, they are doing that. You have a question? Yeah, pure survival, right? The comment there, if you didn't hear it, was like Naomi and Ruth, right? How are they going to find safety and security? Through marriage, right? Through marriage, through a man, okay? During that context there, okay? All right. Any comments or questions on that? Okay. All right. So going back to where we started, the context again is 3 case studies, right? Murder, adultery, and divorce, and all pointed to you have to value people. And in this context, and when Jesus is talking about, I mean, imagine all the things he could have brought up, right? But he focuses on these things. And he's showing that in this society, in first century Israel, these things are happening. And because these things are happening, we are devaluing people. And they shouldn't be, because they are all part of God's image. All right. And so Jesus definitely in his context is going after one's heart. All right. Again, this presentation on a divorce does not address all the legitimate reasons or all the what ifs that are out there. Right. It kind of leaves you kind of lacking a little bit. All right. And I think there's discussions that can be had further. Comments, questions? Okay, thank you.